This is the 10-Minute Contrarian Podcast. This is VP. We are a solutions-based podcast, diving into the world of contrarian investing and alternative finance. You can find us hosted on the No Nonsense Forex YouTube channel, NoNonsenseForex.com, and podcast players everywhere. Episode 197 is brought to us by Bybit. We've seen the market stagnate recently, which means the same thing it always means. It's about to make a move up or down. The great thing about trading is it doesn't really matter which way it goes. You get to profit off of both. So get yourself ready. Get yourself in this ecosystem. The way you do this is by going down to the show notes, clicking on the Bybit blog, reading it, making sure it's for you, and then click my affiliate link at the very bottom. Get yourself locked in. You now have a broker that can withstand the largest heist in financial history. You now have a broker that gives you so many extra things and extra options that other brokers simply do not. Because as everybody knows on this podcast, with Bybit, membership has its rewards. This is the 10-Minute Contrarian Podcast, and I've given you guys so many concepts and things you can do to generate income over the past 197 episodes. I'd say probably 160 of them minimum have been things you can do in the financial world to profit. There's probably more than that. But every once in a while, we need to start talking about the other side of the equation. There's making money, and then there's saving money. And Benjamin Franklin said it. Penny saved is a penny earned. He's right. If you do two-column accounting, if you save $500, it's the same as making $500. So this is also very important, and this is something you do all the time. You don't make money in the market all the time. So this stuff really, really, really adds up. I had done an episode on this podcast called Live Somewhere Else. If you're new, you're going to want to check that episode out. The reason I'm really doing this episode now is because we haven't talked about it in a while. People generally enjoy when I talk about things like this from the numbers. I've done a number of blogs on living abroad, especially in Latin America. And, since I last did that episode, we have gotten a lot of new subscribers and new listeners to this podcast. My subscriber numbers have gone up quite a bit in the last 2 months. I have no idea why. The format of what I'm doing has not changed, but it's like that sometimes. It just goes up and down. So welcome, everybody who is relatively new here. And if you didn't know, I am back in my homeland of the United States right now for a little while, but I live full-time in Latin America. Living abroad has always been my dream, but I waited so I could do it without the constraints of time and money. It took me until my 40s until I could do that. I honestly could have done it sooner had I known some of the things I'm about to tell you today, so stay tuned for that. But when I finally left Las Vegas and decided to live abroad, this, as luck would have it, was 2020, right when COVID hit, and my dream of moving to Europe was all but dashed. Like you couldn't go do that at the time. But there were some places in Latin America that were still open and operational and not completely ridiculous. So that's what I did, and I just kind of fell in love. It's one of those things. Now, I was finally able to scratch the Europe itch in 2022 and see a lot of countries that I wanted to see and spend a bit more time there than your average tourist would, just to see, what would it be like if I lived here. And I enjoyed every place I went. I can't think of one country that just completely sucked. I mean, Luxembourg was really boring. I couldn't understand why people spend so much money to live there, probably because of the tax breaks. But, I mean, I had a great time everywhere. But in terms of living there, I did not feel like any place there was superior to the best places to live in Latin America. So we're going to talk about that today as well. Here's how the format of today's episode is going to go. I'm going to give you an overview on why I think it's a really good idea for the majority of people listening to this podcast to relocate to a place like Latin America, because it is honestly one of the best things I ever did in my life. And so many of the things I grew up thinking were going to be problems with relocating to a place like this were absolutely wrong and absolutely not problems. And I felt pretty stupid for thinking those things, but at least I learned at some point. But anyway, I'm deviating from the structure. I need to tell you what that's going to be. So I will give you the reasons why and the how-to. Then I'm going to go over every country in Central America, the Caribbean, and then also include Mexico, that I am familiar with enough to where I can speak a little bit about it. And I will let you know if I consider these places to be more of a vacation spot or a spot where you can actually live. Because most people, I think, conflate the two, and I would hate to have you relocate to a place that's probably not going to be in your best interest. So we'll go over that, and at the very end, we'll talk about dating. I know that's important to a lot of you. As a perpetually single man, I have done a lot of it out this way, and there are some differences, and we will talk about that. But the reasons why it's advantageous to move and relocate to a place like this should be pretty obvious if you're in a Western country. They're all dying. They're all on the downhill. None of these countries are the future of anything. They may be the present of something. But if you know anything about countries around the world, and the majority of my audience, you understand geopolitics and global finance and what's going on, you know. And let me tell you, I've lived in places that are on the way down. I have lived in places that are at their peak, and I have lived in places that are on the way up. And let me tell you, on the way up is certainly the most exciting and the most fun. You can feel the energy. There's just a general excitement in the air, and it's contagious. To where a lot of places you go in the West now, it's almost like, you ever walk into an office supply store these days? Like in the way I know in the United States for sure, I was just at one. Like it's the same thing every time now, because people just don't shop there a whole lot anymore. Yet the buildings still exist. So like half the shelves are empty. Things aren't very organized. It just feels dead inside. There's like 2 people working there, and you can barely find them. The register's broken, and you're just like, this is a first world country in 2025. Why is this happening? Well, it's because we are no longer on our way up. We are no longer at our peak. We are slowly on our way down. And what are we getting for all this? What is our reward for living in a place like this? Well, most of us can barely afford anything anymore. Our disposable income has gone down, not up. Taxes are very high, and we are slowly starting to learn where those taxes have been going this entire time. Now, in a place like the United States, you would think it would be a little better there than the majority of the West, simply because of this current administration and what they are attempting to do. I have very unfortunate news for you. It doesn't really matter what they do. Our debt is simply too high. We would have to cut Medicare and defense just to get us close, and nobody is ever going to do that. Are we getting rid of some waste and some dead weight that we should have gotten rid of a long time ago? Sure, and that's a good feel-good story. But we have been financially, in the United States, it's been terminal for a long time. American citizens are already starting to realize what that feels like, and I'm telling you right now, it is only going to get worse. We need to reestablish the middle class in the United States, and depending on who we vote for in the next probably 8 years after this term is going to determine a lot of if that happens or if it doesn't. But that's going to be a very long process. And would you like to wait 12 years to see what that looks like? Now, I want to reiterate, this is kind of obvious, but I need to say it because people always go to extremes when you talk about things like this. If you don't like where you go, or if you leave your home country, you can always go back. I rarely see this for what it's worth, but I do see it. Most people who end up living abroad never, ever turn back. Think about that. But you can always go back. But to a Western country, I don't think I'm ever going to do it. I mean, the EU, we already know, is dying. Anybody who lives there who doesn't think it's dying is insane. Australia, UK, like your leadership hates you and does nothing in your best interest anymore, and you still end up voting for these people. Canada, You might have had a chance, but now the poster child for the World Economic Forum is leading heavily in the polls, so have fun with that. And look, in Latin America, they are famous for voting for complete idiots. Even when they don't, the next term they typically do again. I just described all of South America. But here's the thing. If you can manage to make even a modest salary in the West and then spend the money you make in a place like Latin America, you are considered rich. And a lot of rules that hurt you in the country you're in right now will not hurt you here, because the majority of these things do not apply to the rich. The poor get screwed first, the middle class gets screwed next, and the rich are generally fine. Now, in the West, they do make rules to screw the rich as well, but you are not going to find that in Latin America. And if you make a modest salary in the West and you move to Latin America, you are going to be rich. I could probably stop the podcast right there. How would it feel to be rich? How would it feel to live in the best part of whatever city you live in? Or one of the best parts, top 5 neighborhoods. Neighborhoods which are extremely safe, by the way. Like, you're living in these places and nobody is telling you what to do. And these places are absolute time warps too, and I say that in the best possible way. I think a lot of it reminds me of growing up in the United States in the 1990s. Like, things are prosperous. People are generally good and polite to each other. People go to shopping malls like they did in the 1990s. Shopping malls in the U.S. right now are war zones that nobody wants to go to, barring a few exceptions. But you still get that nice, wholesome, family vibe from the shopping malls in Latin America. I know that's one small thing, but I think it's a good microcosm of the type of culture I like to see. I love it. I absolutely love every bit of it. All the fears I had turned out to be wrong. I haven't been to one place in Latin America that didn't feel way safer than the United States. I've met people, notably retirees, who don't speak the language at all, and they get by just fine. I think it's stupid not to learn the language at least a little bit to where you're proficient enough to order food and give directions to a taxi driver, things like that. But that's probably as far as you really have to get. I think you're missing out if you don't go further than that. But if you're too lazy to take a few months out of your life to learn a foreign language, then let's be honest. You're not the type that's going to get your ass off the couch and do much of anything. So I don't even know why we're talking. Now, one barrier I will say, and I need to say it here, is if you have children. A lot of people won't move away from their country because their kids are in school and they have activities and things like that. And I understand this. And I can't really speak too much as somebody who does not have children themselves. But what I can say is you can give your children a very good life overseas in a cheaper country. Again, you will be on the rich side. You will be able to afford private school, typically an international school, a bilingual school, a school where your children are not in any kind of danger, a school where the other parents are also of means and you can make great connections there. Things like this are really not the barriers you probably think they are. I should just add that part while we're here. But man, this podcast is going to go forever, so let me go ahead. And this is why I divided it up. I'm not even touching South America in this episode because that's a whole episode unto itself. But let's go over the requirements. One, like we spoke about a little bit before, you're going to have to find a way to make money online to make this work. You need to make Western currency so you can take advantage of that arbitrage of spending it in Latin America. And people don't think there's a lot of ways to do this. There are so many ways to do this. There are so many remote jobs you can take up right now. There are careers that will pay you very well in the remote space. In particular, something like cybersecurity. I know people who got started in cybersecurity like 2 years ago, and they're making 6 figures living in a Latin American country where a $30,000 a year salary would make them rich. And they are now in an industry that will never, ever die and making really good money. Now, some of these places will want you to be, like in the United States, for example, like physically there. But what some people do is they buy, I don't know what it's called, it's this box that they keep in the United States, like at a friend's house or a relative's house, and make sure it's always on, and then they ping from there. You can't just use a VPN. You'll get caught. But if you do it this way, then they will always think you are living in wherever that box is, and they'll never question it. I never had one person have issues with this. Now, if you are already successful in trading, that helps. I would probably still get a baseline job of some sort, just to have income coming in all the time. But I have met professional Forex traders, crypto traders, and they have all decided to move for the lifestyle and for the taxes as well. Now, the whole tax thing I've talked about a few times. I'm not going to do that too much now, but this is another way people go from rich in a place like this to quite rich. Again, what you make and what you save are the exact same thing. And not only does your money go a lot farther in a place like this, but you end up with a lot more of it. And all you have to do is get your ass up and make the move, but the majority of people just simply don't. They would rather do nothing and complain all day about the situation they're in, and that's fine for them. That doesn't concern me because I no longer associate with people like that. I grew up with people like that. I worked with people like that. But now that I have a choice of who I have in my life and who I don't, it's killers only. And you're going to run into a lot of those people too if you play your cards right. Now, the how-to in terms of residence permits and things like that, again, I've already talked about this. I already know this episode's going to go long, so I'm going to leave this part out. All I will say is you're going to want one. They're still cheap in certain places. I've talked about this already too. And my mentality has always been, if I find a smoking deal somewhere and it's something I can have all the time with very little requirements, I'm going to pull the trigger on that because I've learned that these things never get easier and never get cheaper to obtain. Like, never. Why? Because people discover them and they take advantage of them. And countries are like, whoa, okay, we need to slow this down a little bit. And you slow it down by making it more expensive and harder to obtain. And as a result, I currently have 3 foreign residence permits that are currently all more difficult and more expensive to obtain. But do not despair. The majority of these are still extremely affordable and easy to do. But let's go ahead and get into the countries now. Let's start in the Caribbean. I think this will be a very easy one to do. The first one is going to be Puerto Rico. Now, I have been to Puerto Rico 5 times. 4 times were for work. I took a year off of hospitality to become a hospitality consultant, and it sent me to a lot of Native American casinos and also to the Caribbean. Which, this sounds like an amazing job, but you're working so much, you don't even really have a whole lot of time to enjoy yourself, which is why I went back to Puerto Rico as a tourist, just to enjoy myself. Now, Puerto Rico, I will say, has a great tax program for Americans. It has drawn a lot of people in the crypto space, for example, to it. But what's interesting, and I called this when it happened, is a few years, not even a few years later, the majority of them have come back. Puerto Rico is a great vacation place, but in my opinion, not a great place to live. And I want to understand, I have people all over the world listening to this podcast. They live in places like this, and they might disagree. But I'm telling you, as a Westerner, as far as what you're going to expect and desire when you go to these places, Puerto Rico, I don't think is it. The people who still stay there are the people who are of retirement age, like your Peter Schiffs, your Mike Maloney. The majority of everybody else who has gone there has come back, even with the bananas tax savings. It just wasn't worth it for them. I think the Caribbean in general does not have the functionality and the amount of things to do for young and middle-aged people. It's funny, too. Like growing up in the West, we always thought that being able to move to an island somewhere and live on a beach all day was just the absolute dream. We got all that propaganda in our head for some reason. And I'll tell you right now, I know a lot of expats, and very, very few of them live on a beach. The ones who do are retirees. They've worked at a job for 40 years. All they want to do is just decompress and chill out for the rest of their lives. And a lifestyle like that is perfect for them. But younger people, we typically need things to do. And again, we always thought the Caribbean was like the dream, right? I don't know one expat who lives in the Caribbean. Not one. I mean, it's boring, for one. I tried living in a beach town for 2 months. The third or fourth day I was there, I was like, oh man, I made a big mistake. I am officially bored out of my mind. Caribbean food is generally good, fairly limited, often fried. I don't know if there's too much there, really. Dating is awful. Forget it. I mean, it's not non-existent, but it's pretty limited. And weather-wise, it just gets hot and humid a lot all the time, which is for some people, but generally not for everybody. Hot, humid weather takes a lot out of me and makes me unmotivated. And as somebody who doesn't have a job and needs to stay motivated all the time, this is a problem. So let's just go ahead and wipe out the entire Caribbean in one fell swoop here. Great place to visit for sure. Been to Puerto Rico, been to the Virgin Islands, been to the Bahamas. Beautiful places, wonderful people. Just not where you want to be generally. Not to mention is going to be a lot more expensive than any other place I'm talking about today. You might be, depending on where you are, you might be spending $1.20 on the dollar compared to the United States, for example. It can be cheaper, but it could also be a lateral move, and it could also be more expensive. And why would you do that if you didn't have to? Latin America's got a lot of beaches too, if that's your thing. Difference is you have a lot more money in your pocket. So let's go ahead and move on to Mexico and Central America. We will start with Mexico, and I will say I've been all over Latin America. For me, I think Mexico is going to be the place I spend the most time in the next 5 to 10 years. I did not see that coming. I did not expect to see so many different places and end up in a country that borders my own country. I expected to be a bit further out, but I don't know what to say. Mexico's just got it. It has everything. All types of land, depending on what type of land you like. Desert, mountains, beaches, jungle. And contrary to popular belief, it's not always super hot in Mexico. They have mountains, which means they have elevation, which means there's entire huge cities that don't get super hot. Mexico City, for example, is more of like an eternal spring type city. Mexico City's cold. It's 7,000 feet in the air. It's jacket weather most nights in Mexico City. How many of you knew that? So again, you can get whatever climate you're looking for in a country like that. The food, world famous, and even if you're not super keen on Mexican food, one, you will probably end up really liking it. And two, they have all the international options you could ever want. Plus, the food is generally fresher, more towards the organic side. And I don't think I have to explain the benefits of that to you. All of the ghost stories you hear about crime in Mexico is limited to 2 major places. One, the border. Don't move to the border like an idiot. Fly past the border. It gets really good. And then 2 is another place you're not going to be anyway. You have some of these smaller pueblos within the country that are small enough to where they can be commandeered by a cartel. And you will get a lot of violence there because cartels are fighting over territory. But again, you're not going to be there. You're not going to be there. And unless you're a moron, you're not going to be on the border either. So all of these stats you see come across the newswire when it comes to Mexico being dangerous are not going to apply to you. And we'll get to dating in a moment, but I will say, growing up in the United States and seeing the immigration we would see coming in from Mexico, I never thought Mexican women were all that attractive. And then I move there, and I find that Mexican women, the ones who stay there, are extremely attractive. But again, we'll get to that later. And not to mention, again, the easiest and cheapest residency permit out there, not named Palau, in the world, with no presence requirements. You can just get it, move back to your shitty Western country, and live there, and still have a really great back pocket option. We're not talking about Palau, which is pretty much just like one suburb. We're talking about a vast, diverse country that still, I would say, depending on where you go, can be anywhere from maybe 40 to 65 cents on the dollar in terms of cost of living. Mexico's the shit. I love it. It gives me the functionality, excitement, and overall lifestyle that I'm just looking for in my life right now. To me, it's the best combination of all of those things. So let's go south a bit and let's go to Belize. Belize is an interesting option for people because of a couple of things. One, the beach life. Two, people are lazy and they don't want to learn a foreign language, and the native language in Belize is English. But it kind of stops there. I would say Belize is more of a vacation spot than a living spot. It's not cheap, really, at all. The food is not terribly exciting, and it's just not a place that has that energy that motivates you on a daily basis. It's kind of going to be the opposite. It's going to be more of that Caribbean lifestyle. So that's what I would say. Travel there for sure. Cool place. But I personally don't know anybody who lives there, and I think there's a reason for that. Going down to Guatemala. I'm going to say another place that's good to vacation, less so to live. Food is good, not great. There are just a few places, especially around the lake, that are just absolute vibes. Great place to go vacation and just get lost for a bit. But also kind of needlessly expensive. I mean, we're talking more like the 60 to 75 cents on the dollar range. And if I'm going to pay more, you better be giving me something for that. And I just don't think Guatemala does that. If you want a city life, you have Guatemala City, but there's only certain areas there where you can even live comfortably and safely. I just don't think this is the move. Moving down to Nicaragua. I do know people who live in Nicaragua. Nicaragua attracts a very certain type of expat, and that certain type is not me. I don't know if you kind of know me. I don't know if you've ever heard me talk before, but I need some level of sophistication in the place I'm living, and Nicaragua just doesn't offer that anywhere. But I don't say this in a bad way. Nicaragua is what it is. It's very cheap. You can live there maybe 20, 30 cents on the dollar if you wanted to. Get some nice land. Get a nice place. Like, you will get all of those things. You will just fall very short on the infrastructure side. But if you want a more nature-focused or country-style, pastoral-style life, this is going to be a really good option for you. Residence permits are a bit more on the expensive side compared to the dirt cheap ones, but probably, if you look around the world, still reasonably cheap. Nicaragua is a communist country by definition, but if you are not an actual citizen, which means a passport holder, a lot of these things will never apply to you. It is certainly an option. I would put it more in the livable side than I would the vacation side, actually. But certainly caters to a certain type of expat. And for those people, it's absolute paradise. But me personally, I'm not super compelled to go back there anytime soon. Let's go down to Honduras. I have never been to Honduras, but I know a little bit about it, and I know a lot of people who have been there, and I know people from there. The majority of people are going to travel to a place called Roatan. It is an island off the coast of Honduras, which is very safe and very island-like. Really small. Again, certainly a more vacation place than a livable place. I do know on the interior, there's a city that was rated one of the most dangerous in the world that I hear now, for the most part, depending on where you go, isn't super dangerous and actually pretty fun. A place called San Pedro Sula. I know some people from there. They have invited me down, and Honduras is on my list for those reasons. But the capital, Tegucigalpa, is still really messy and dangerous from what I understand. Lifestyle is really cheap. I mean, probably Nicaragua prices here for more of a city life if you want it. But again, never been. Most of what I heard is just secondhand information. My information across the board here is relatively spotty. But if you're an animal and you want some adventure, depending on where you go, Honduras does not have to be super dangerous. And for what it's worth, some of the women in Honduras are next level. So risk reward on this one, I would say. Let's go to El Salvador. Very popular place now for Bitcoin maxis, for freedom-loving people. But the problem is, a lot of those people have money. And so when you move to a country and you have money and other people who have money are doing the same, the country as a whole gets more expensive. Now, it's still Latin America. It's going to be fairly cheap overall. I would say more in like the 60 to 70 cents on the dollar range for most people. Now, if you're one of those people who just loves to surf, Nicaragua's great. El Salvador is great. I have no idea what you're going to pay in a little remote beach town, if that is your version of paradise. The food here, it's mostly international, like El Salvadorian food. It is a thing, but if you're living in the cities, for example, I spent some reasonable time in San Salvador. I didn't get exposed to a lot of it, and I was looking for it. But some very convenient international options. They love American food there. They love American culture. Pretty easy to assimilate there. So I would say El Salvador is more of a live place than a vacation place, believe it or not. Real potential there still. It's just one of those things to where you kind of wish you would have gotten there 5 years ago. Speaking of which, believe it or not, I do not have a lot of boots on the ground experience in Costa Rica. Now, Costa Rica is a perfect example of why you should get there early instead of later. Costa Rica is kind of the dream for Americans 25 years ago, but it's funny how these things still stick in people's heads. Like they're like, oh, I would love to move and retire to Costa Rica. Well, you can. It's absolutely beautiful and a great lifestyle, a very slow lifestyle, if that's what you want. But in many ways, it's more expensive than the United States. Like, you're going to Latin America and you're spending more. So just keep that in mind. Really no value proposition there, but definitely a lifestyle that a lot of people really like. Surfers, retirees, people like that. So you just have to decide where you fit on that spectrum. Let's see, is there any other country I'm forgetting before we get to Panama? I don't think so. I think we've hit them all. So let's end up in Panama. You guys know I'm a resident of Panama. I've spent meaningful time there. I really like Panama. It is more of a livable place than it is a vacation place, in my opinion. I think marketing has a lot to do with that. I think Panama would be a great place to go vacation myself. They just don't push that. Now, if you do go there, I would certainly live in the capital, Panama City. The rest of the country is, again, going to be more structured towards your people who really like a place like Nicaragua. Too slow for me, not interested, but the city is a vibe. There is no place in the world like Panama City, Panama. It is its own place, and you understand that as soon as you land. It is very metropolitan. It was built mostly in the 80s, and the style of buildings reflect that. You have a lot of financial buildings, which I find to be very exciting for some reason. I would wake up and look out my window and see a bunch of bank buildings and just be super motivated. I don't know. If you're anything like me, maybe that's exciting to you. I don't know. But I chose not to live there permanently because, one, the weather. It rains every day. It's more, there's 2 months out of the year where it doesn't rain, but it becomes even hotter. So you're talking about maybe like 5 degrees latitude in Panama. It is very tropical, and it has tropical weather. So yes, it rains maybe 15, 30 minutes a day most of the time. It's very like Florida-style rain. But that makes it humid all the time. I like to walk. I don't enjoy walking in Panama, even at night. It's just so humid. And again, that just takes a lot of energy out of me, which is a shame because Panama is really cool. Another problem, though, is it's awfully expensive. We're talking probably 80 cents on the dollar. And for food and rent, we're talking about a lateral move more often than not than what you're going to find in the United States. Now, the United States is a big place. Certain places are more expensive than others, but on the whole, for me, coming from Las Vegas, I was spending the same on rent, and the same on food in most cases, which is odd because we have the canal right there. But yeah, food's expensive. The things that aren't expensive and the things that make it not a dollar per dollar is pretty much everything else. Transportation is going to be very cheap. Services are very cheap. Healthcare is very cheap. And so this is what does make it cheaper overall, but just not enough for my taste. But a great place with great infrastructure. A lot of people speak English there. Superb connectivity. They use the dollar. All the banks use the dollar. Like, you could certainly do worse. But you have to want that style of weather. And a lot of people do. I just don't. Okay, so pretty sure I have hit all the countries. Now let's talk about the honeys, the mamacitas. Dating. Dating in Latin America is pretty fucking awesome, I have to say. There's a lot of people who complain about women in the West. Those are usually people who don't do well in the dating space overall anyway. I will admit it has gotten worse. I felt that when I was in Vegas. It did get progressively worse over time as a single man. Now, here's the thing. If you don't have a lot of game and a lot of experience and you're just not really good at talking to women, I'm not here to judge you. I'm just going to guide you in terms of where to go. You are going to want to go to a place like Southeast Asia, where they will really pay a lot of credence to your white skin or your black skin. Now, understand, too, there is going to be a transactional nature to this relationship in most cases. But once you realize that really every relationship in some way is transactional when you get down to it, you really don't worry about it as much. Now, sometimes there can be a predatory nature to this transactionality as well. You have to be very careful about that, but that's outside of my pay grade for right now. I'm just saying that plenty of Western guys who are generally awkward with women have a very, very good time in Southeast Asia. The problem is these same guys think they're going to have that level of success in Latin America, and they typically do not. And then they go so far as to blame the women, which is silly, because I tell these people, I'm like, all right, what has been the one common denominator in all of your failed relationships with Western women and with Latin women? You. Yeah, but most people just don't have that self-awareness. I will say that being from a Western country, being a white guy or a black guy, will more often than not get you in the door. But you have to do the rest after that. Latin women like Latin men. But gringos, depending on where you go, but in most places, still are a bit of a novelty. But if you can't give them that level of excitement and passion that they're used to, then they have no reason to be with you. They don't chase a particular lifestyle the same way a lot of Western women might, or the same way a lot of Southeast Asian women might. They are very family-centric. Again, I grew up in the United States thinking every Mexican girl just wanted to get a green card and come to the U.S. No, only the extremely poor ones had that dream. Most women in Latin countries love their country, love their culture, and absolutely do not want to be far away from their families. That's another thing. If you want a serious girlfriend from one of these countries, you can't be somebody like me who just up and goes somewhere else for a few months at a time. They hate that. Now, for casual dating, this isn't a problem, but it just depends on what you're looking for. But I will say on the whole, Latin women do have more traditional values than Western women do. Some of that Western culture has seeped in to these other cultures to a degree. But if you're looking for more traditional women, then Latin America is a good place to be. The women come in all shapes and sizes. Yeah, some are outgoing, some are more reserved. A lot of them do speak enough English to where it's not going to be a big problem. Some don't, but you don't have to date those women. I've tried. I've had Google Translate dates to where you're pretty much passing the phone back and forth. I think that is a crazy waste of time. But for the most part, depending on where you go, especially if you're in a large city, which I suggest no matter where you want to go or what type of person you are, everybody starts in a big city. It's just a better place to learn how to get around in countries like this. And you're also going to meet a lot more expats that can give you a lot of on-the-ground intel, which is really important. They may not turn into your best friends. They might turn into your best friends, but either way, you are going to want that human interaction, and you're going to want that intel especially. So if you're already in these cities for that reason, you're going to have a lot of choices as far as dating goes. But again, you're going to have to be fairly good at it. I have had a woman tell me this more than a few times, some variation of what I'm about to tell you right now. As an American in particular, I'm not sure how this would translate to other Western countries. I'm sure pretty similar. But they said, look, we used to fantasize about American men growing up because of movies and TV. Like, you guys were cowboys and billionaires and superheroes. But then we finally had a lot of you guys come down to our country, and you just turned out to be not any of those things. They're not looking for some nerdy guy who knows a lot about crypto. And that's kind of a problem because I am a nerdy guy who knows a lot about crypto. But thankfully, I was in hospitality for a long time and in Vegas for a long time, and I know how to talk to women, and I'm comfortable with flirting, and I have a lot of experience because I've been single most of my life. So that has helped. But I remember when I first heard that, I'm like, okay, so just don't be a huge nerd, and I should be fine. And it turns out I was. But again, your mileage may certainly vary here. I will just say that if you come down specifically for that purpose, this is what you should probably expect. Things are certainly going to be a bit different in South America. We will go over that when the time comes. But I get very anxious and very uncomfortable when my 10-Minute Contrarian podcast runs this long, so we're going to end it here. But what I would say to the majority of you in the West is get rid of all your stupid limiting beliefs. You're going to find out real soon once you actually make the move just how dumb those were and how there is certainly a better life out there for you. And again, there's not a lot of risk. If you come out here and you don't like it, you can always move back. Most people don't, but it is an option. But either way, this podcast exists to give you the best life possible. Making more money and making the right moves in life play a really, really big part in how awesome or how terrible your life is. And that is why we're here. But hopefully this episode has also compelled some of you to stop sitting on your hands and make moves, because as I've illustrated a few times in this one episode alone, the sooner you make these moves, the better. And making these moves is certainly not crazy, because you are going to want to be early.